So I've started the recording. Couple quick notes. Actually, no. The only real quick note I have right now is remember that tonight, I think it's 8:15, something like that. They're doing the Skype call with Matt Drury. So come on out and check that out. I think that'll be all of it. It'll be over in room 290. I actually just sent him a text message with a picture of the flyer because he used to be the guy who would schedule these talks and go around and hang up the flyers. So it's kind of fun. So how many of you have already kind of started on this? Got any issues you're having yet? You got some issues? What are the issues?
One, I can't get the flag to stay on the pole.
You can't get the flag to stay on the pole?
Yeah. Like the birds stay locked where they start and
They
press the flag
jump on
starts.
all of it.
No, the flag just drops and those birds stay there. So I don't have to operate one way or left it. And I can't get them to contact the cans. He just walks through.
Okay. We're going to work on some of that. Yeah. Is it not a texture? There's some weird stuff going on. Try 6. What's that do? Yeah, there's like sections of it. Here's what I do. File new. And go to the second project again. How that falls there. It doesn't look like it's bringing in texture maps. You have the project over here? So when we copied down the stuff from the network, we need to copy all of the other folders too. And that's where all the textures are going to show up. I bet that's it. But if you go back up to the network, just pull that whole folder now, that should bring all that stuff. So we're probably not going to render with Arnold. We're probably going to render with hardware 2.0. I think I know what's happening. So we're going to do a little bit here, but more than likely what we're going to do is we're just going to render out the viewport here. So I'll show you how. Okay. And I'm really tempted to do the entire lecture with Todd's glasses on, but I'm not gonna, because then I'll trip and fall and break Todd's glasses. Anybody else need any attendance sheet? Okay. So, having a couple little problems to sort of head all that off, to make sure before you open your file, just open up Maya, File, New Scene, right? Then go File, Set Project, and then set it to the entire SimBots folder. So underneath that is the images folder and the textures folder and all that. So if we just select the SimBots, hit set, then when we go to open it, all of the materials should work then. In most cases, when the materials are not working, it's either that or it's that you have it set to, you know, you can hit 4, 5, and 6 for wireframe, shaded, and textured. If you hit 4, you get this. 5, you get this. And 6, you're going to get the full texture scene. So, I didn't make this scene, by the way. This is a free model you can download from, I think, Turbo Squid or somewhere like that. I just wanted to get you some environments to have something to have in, right? And I didn't do the robot either. He's cute, though. So we really have two simulations we're trying to do. We're trying to do a flag, and we're trying to do the robot crashing through stuff, right? So as a quick recap, what we're doing here is a fabric simulation using NCOF, and we're using a rigid body simulation using Bullet. Okay, so it's interesting. It's both like physics, but we're using two different things to get that same, to get the effect of physics, right? So what I'm going to go ahead and do first is sort of show you the flag solution, or what I would attempt on the flag. So create a plane. It put the plane way over there. If I hit F while it's selected, it'll usually let me focus in on it. And that way I can sort of figure out where this thing is at. It's hiding underneath this building, right? So F is how you can find something in a giant scene. Select it here. Right. In fact, if I want to sort of go back to that other part where the robot is, I can sort of figure out the difference there. But I happen to know it's over here, right? So there's where my robot is, frame 1. So I'm just kind of making some stuff to get, or just making this to get a rough approximation of a flag. Is that building floating? Huh.
Yeah.
Feel free to put that back down on the ground if you'd like. So let's go ahead and rotate this. So you may have a couple of questions about this. The first thing I want is I want to make my flag kind of elongated. You know, flags, at least like national flags and stuff like that, are usually rectangular, not perfectly square. Yours can be whatever you want it to be. And I'm going to go ahead and do that just by scaling it out. But you see, when I do that, now my faces are not, like they're wider here than they are vertically. So we can kind of use the inputs to scale that up some more. So maybe add some more divisions in both directions, right? But add maybe a few more in the height direction, just so I get enough information to let this simulate appropriately, right? That may be a little too long. Like that. Scale it down. Now, these are just some Maya tricks I'm gonna kind of cover. One thing that you may be having issues with is getting it lined up perfectly, right, to the flagpole. I'm sure most of you recognize that if you hit Insert, we can change our object's pivot point, right? You can also do that with, and you hit Insert again, it'll go back. You can also do that with D. If you hold down D, you can move it, right? And so just to make this easier to snap to the flagpole, I'm going to hold down D. So now I'm in my pivot point mode, right? And then I'm going to hold down V to snap that to different vertices. And so I'm just doing that just to snap it up here to my top. Right? So now my pivot point is there. So D is inserting the pivot point or changing the pivot point. V allows me to snap it to stuff, right? And so now I have my pivot point at that location, right? I can get it in here kind of close and then hold down V again to start snapping it to parts of my models. And so I'm in here kind of closer. Now it's snapped to my flagpole, and I can just snap that around. So V is for vertex, but it'll snap it to pretty much any point. So it'll also snap it to like CVs and stuff like that. Yes?
Sorry, it took me way longer to make my flag with you. How, what? Can you back up a little bit?
Yep. Control Z a few times. There we go. So holding down D allows me to move my pivot point.
Wait, D or
D as in dog. And so the really only reason I'm doing this is so I can sort of snap the corner of my flag to the corner of my flagpole, right? V allows me to snap things to vertices, right? The V as in vector. There we go. So D is in my pivot point mode. Holding down V means I can slide my pivot point around until I'm up here at the top corner of my object, right? And so now my object's pivot point is there instead of the center, right? And really the only reason I did that is so I can use the move tool and V again to snap this to my flagpole. Now if I get in here close, hitting F again, you're seeing it's sort of snapping it to the side of it. Right? And so what I'm wanting is to snap it to like this tangent here. So hold down V again, and sort of snap it around to there. Now it's perfectly aligned to that now. My preference is just to nudge it a slight hair out just so it doesn't collide with the pole too much. But now it looks like it's on there pretty good. Okay. I also personally, I would take this time before you start simulating anything to make sure that the UVs on this flag are laid out in a way that you can make whatever design you want to. So again, this isn't a modeling class or any of that, and you'll probably remember most of this from principles. But with this object selected, if I go to Windows, Modeling Editor, UV Editor, you'll see that the UVs for my object are square, but my flag is not, right? And so that means if I just went in here and put an image, it's going to sort of squash it, and it's going to be hard to get it to line up to it. So, so I'm just going to go UVs and then just do automatic. And so if I do that, it didn't really change anything. And the reason it didn't is because Maya is still thinking of my object as square, right? And the reason it's thinking of that as square is because I've scaled it, right? If I put all the same numbers in here, right, it is square, right? So basically I have a square object that I've just scaled. And I want Maya to think of this as completely new in that shape. So before I UV it, I'm going to make sure I have the entire object selected, right? I want to do Edit, Delete by Type, History. Just make sure to delete by type, not delete all by type, because that will wipe out everything in your scene's history, including like the skinning and rigging to the robot. So just delete by type history, and this will do it for what you have selected. And then I'll do Modify, Freeze Transformations. So that's one of the reasons I do this before I start simulating, is because after you've simulated it, if you try freezing the transformations, you're probably going to break something in the simulation. So now, if I go in here and do the automatic mapping on the UVs, UV automatic, you're going to see that it gives me that, which is the right shape. It's just turned up on its side, so we can kind of rotate that however we need to get that. So UV shell, and then there's a couple of transform tools. Right, there's that. Oh, I can always just rotate it with E and hold down. I think you already know this as well. If you hold down J when you're rotating stuff, it will snap it to 10 degree or 15 degree increments. And so that's one of the ways you can rotate this 90 degrees. So, so just getting this in here so I can have some UVs that I can take into Photoshop or wherever and make whatever flag you want. Yes. You're right. You go to UVs and then automatic. If it's still doing it as a square, you have to freeze your transformations first. So that's modify, freeze transformations. And then I usually just delete history just because it makes the object cleaner as well. So.
And then it's still square. Oh.
Try to get right behind it. try this here. It was probably not freezing your transformations since I had a keyframe on it. So when you hit that, it's like, I can't freeze them, it burns them. And that's probably the error. That just E, like the E to rotate. And again, if you hold down J, this is just kind of a neat trick that I'm not sure everybody always recognizes, that with any object, when you're rotating it, if you hold down J while you're doing that, it will snap it in like 15-degree increments. And so that's how you can take something from 90 to 180 degrees really quickly. Okay, so just so we can see it, I'm going to go ahead and put an object on here, or a material on here, assign new material, and I'm going to go something kind of simple, AI standard surface. I'm going to turn my specular way down. And then for my color, I'm just going to map in a checkerboard. So get something like this. And we'll make it a purple and green checkerboard, just so your eyes hurt. Does that hurt? Okay. Oh, that really does hurt. Let me not do that. Purple and blue, that's nice. Maybe make it a softer blue. Yeah, this is an animation class. There we go. And I'll go ahead and do a couple more repeats on this. Let's do it. No, not 150. 15. There we go. So now he has a little checkered flag that he's going to be dragging around behind him. 10 looks better, I think. Okay. So again, when we hit play, nothing's going to happen, right? So first things first, I want to turn this into an in-cloth object, right? So under Effects, where do I find that? Sorry, what?
What?
Where do I find the in-cloth tool? So we're under Effects. In-cloth, get that. So we're going to, I know, I'm trying to see if anybody's actually listening. So we're going to create in-cloth, right? And so now it's an in-cloth object. Yes?
Oh, you're in effects. I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, the Effects tab. So when I hit play, it's going to play it. It's just going to fall. Now, if we look at this, I want to make sure that we're playing back in play every frame, max real time, right? So that means it may bog down, but it'll never play too fast, right? Which is what we're wanting.
You want to create end-cloth?
Yep. In-cloth, create in-cloth.
My thing needs to do a change.
Huh? You're thinking you did a thingy? What was it?
It's just, it's not doing anything spectacular.
Not spectacular.
Balls. That's what
That's
it's
what it's
supposed
supposed to do.
I'm killing it.
You are. We got this. In-cloth is really just a gravity simulator, right? So what we have now is basically an object that is falling because there is no there's no other forces that are really affecting this other than gravity, right? There's some drag, I guess, like if we were to turn it on its side, but it's like right now drag is kind of affecting the whole thing evenly because we dropped it perfectly straight, which is something we'd never actually really see in the real world. It would be impossible to drop it perfectly straight like that. So, so we're just getting a very boring simulation, right? So what we're going to do first, or next, is we're going to try to pin this to our post here, right? Now, I know some people did this yesterday and we had some errors that kind of happened. If so, I'll show you how to fix that. But just to let you know, this post is not parented under anything, right? What I have is this parent constraint on the post. So the control that is driving this robot is hidden under this ChristineBot rig. It's this ChristineBot rig PLC, and that's the placement controller for the robot. And you'll see some of the stuff on here, but basically I just have a couple of keyframes on some hidden elements. This is a free rig you can download from the internet. And so really all that's happening is this pole has a parent constraint, and this rig control is what's driving it, right? So I'm going to pin or constrain some of the vertices from this flag to the pole, okay? There's a chance that this will cause some stuff to break. Let's see what happens. So I'm just gonna grab, I'm gonna go into vertex mode for my flag, right? And I'm just gonna grab like maybe 2 or 3 at the top, maybe 2 or 3 at the bottom, and maybe a few in the middle. Let's try those. How does that look? That does not look evenly spaced. How about that? That looks good, right? So I have those selected, and then I'm going to hold Shift and select the object of the post itself, the pole itself, right? Now, Maya has constraints. We use those in the principles class to constrain like the controls to the character's legs so we could drive the IK and stuff like that. And we may talk about constraints a little bit more in the future. And those constraints work from object to object. Yes? I haven't yet. So I'm getting to that. So we have it selected, right? So what we're constraining here is parts of the encoff to the object. So we're going to use a different type of constraint, which is just called an end constraint, okay? So again, the order in which I need to select these is the parts of the cough first. So I'm just holding Shift to select these, right? Then I select the post, and then under end constraint, I'm going to try this transform constraint. Let's see what that does. So when I do that, now when I hit play, oh, look at that. Perfect. Right. First time. So it's doing a thing. Maybe not the thing we wanted it to do, but it's simulating, right? So there's a couple of issues with this simulation. What are some of them? Well, the back of it is black. I'm not for sure the back of it will render black, but maybe it will in here. It kind of is. I think really all that's saying is like that's the back side of it. In Viewport 2.0, I think that there's ways we can make it show the other side of it. But and I think when we render, let me test it and see. Oh, that's broken. Hardware 2.0. Let's try that. There we go. So when I render with hardware 2.0, let's see if it renders the back of this as black. There we go. Yeah, so I think it'll render both sides of it. It's just in our viewport, it's looking like that. So, so some of the things we're seeing happening here is that the flag is like really heavy looking, right? It looks very wet. Like it's like flopping around. It's also going through the pole and through the robot. Why is it doing that?
Because they're not passive colliders.
They're not colliders. Like we haven't told it to collide with anything. We just said pin these vertices to the object. Yes?
Now, where did you find the button that did it to the vertices?
The what? Oh, to pin the vertices? The constraint part? It's under in constraint, and I did the transform constraint.
Yes.
Let's try this as this works. Right click on assign existing. Let's try this first. Over here. Where's the material? think that's going to be it's weird. It's like it's duplicating all the places. Same issues here. So right the third time on. And then playback speed. Okay. So a couple people are having similar issues. If you hit play and it starts playing kind of jittery and stretches your flag out, what's really happening is it's skipping frames. So we have like playback speed, play every frame, max real time. That's where you want it. But if you have it set to real time, it may like try to skip some frames, and then it's gonna freak out a little bit, right? And see, when I hit stop, I get this nucleus evaluation skipped. Frame changes too long or too large. So that's really what's happening there. Is it's maybe skipping a frame or two, and it's kind of messing that up. Right? So really, to make this look better, I just need some stuff for it to collide with, right? And I need to play around with the qualities of the fabric to make it simulate the way we want it to, right? Right now, to me, it's a little too stretchy. It's a little too like floppy, right? So I'm going to first play with that. I want to get some result for that. So that's going to be under the polyplane. If we go out here to this ncloth 1 and ncloth shape 1, ncloth shape 1 is going to give us some options on how this thing can simulate. Now, I would encourage you to play with some of this yourself. Like, if we hit play, see how it stretches so much? Like, if that's my only issue I have with it, maybe I would just turn my stretch resistance up to something a little higher. All right, let's see what that does. So now it's resisting stretching, right? Maybe let's try that a little higher, like 100. So we can keep doing this. So we're still getting some stretch resistance there. So we also have bend resistance, shear resistance, restitution angle, all of these different things. Rigidity, I can turn rigidity up a little bit, and it's going to feel a little stiffer. It looks like some of the things that are actually stretching, though, is my constraints. So let me look at that a little bit. So my dynamic constraint is not there. Yeah, dynamic constraint right there. So the constraint method right now is set to spring. I could set that to weld, and that might help. Wait, let me set this my playback speed correctly again. Spring. Spring will probably still work. I'm going to turn my strength up. So that's a little better. My glue strength is already up at 1. I wonder if I can turn that higher. Turn my drop-off distance down. What does that do? So I think that's helping. I need to turn that rigidity back down on the ncloth shape, though, because right now it's looking really stiff. So for me, that's not bad. I'm okay with kind of what I'm getting there. So really the most important part about this, though, is just to mess with it until you get what you're wanting, right? You can also do a little bit of the presets here. So we can go preset. If I wanted to set this to heavy denim and replace that, then I'm going to get a different simulation, right? If I wanted to go for silk, it's going to be lighter and probably going to flap in the wind a little bit more, right? So even though silk may not be exactly what I'm going for, I'm getting a pretty good result out of it. So what I could try is a mix. I could do 100% heavy denim, replace it, and then I could add like 50% silk. Let's see what that does. So to me, it still feels like it needs more silk than heavy denim, so maybe add another 25% silk. So again, play with this however, like to get whatever you you like. I'm actually really liking the silk more than anything because we're getting like more flapping. Again, this is just hanging loosely, right? We don't necessarily have any other forces in here other than gravity and the fact that it's being pulled by a pole, right? So we could go into the nucleus node and add just a little bit of wind speed if we would like. The direction I would want it to be is in positive Z because you can see that would make it blow backwards more. And so I can change my wind direction there, positive Z, 0 on that, and change my wind speed up just a little bit. So now I'm getting a little bit more like that. Maybe it's a little too much. Pull it down a little bit. There we go. So you can also add a little bit of noise to that wind if you want to make it kind of a little bit more like inconsistent. And so just with that, I'm able to get a relatively decent effect, right? Okay. Let's pretend I'm happy with that, right? I am happy, actually. I'm a happy person. But let's pretend I'm pleased with this result. I'm like, I'm done, right? I don't want anything messing that up. Like, I'm going to be doing more things to this file. I don't want to break that file just because I start doing some other things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and cache this out now. If you cache it, you can't go back and change it unless you delete that cache. So yeah.
Should we wrap the UVs before we cache it?
I would. You can change the texture at any point. But I would make sure you've created your UVs before, probably even before you do too much simulation on it, because if you have to unwrap it or do much UV work on it, it may mess up the simulation. Probably not, but it might. So I always, like, before I do any animation, I usually make sure all my UVs are set up. And then if I have to change the texture map, that's not going to mess anything up in the simulation. It'll just change the material, right? Just like if I made it more glossy or something. But if you haven't UV'd it yet, I would probably do that before you cache it. I don't know. It may not make an issue with it, but you see how it's like hanging differently right now? If I ran the automatic mapping on it right now, it would project it. I think I'm just making a guess here. It would project it in the shape that it is right now, and so the UVs would line up differently, right? So you want to at least project it while it's back on frame 0 and like perfectly flat.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this. I'm going to go ahead and select my flag. Again, it's under N cache, C-A-C-H-E, cache. And I think most of you are probably familiar with this word because you hear it in like website lingo, right? Like some websites are saving cache files on you, so it's easier to load later, right? Well, that's what's happening here. It's going to save some local files into my project, so it's easier to load this simulation, this exact simulation later, right? So in cache, create new cache, and this is an in object. So we would also use in cache if we were going to do Maya fluids, like for Steam or whatever. So in object, I'll go ahead and click that. There's my cache. So we can do this however we want to. You can choose the option of doing it in one file, but I'm going to do one file per frame. And it's going to put it in a new folder. It's going to create this folder for me. And so I'm going to say, you can choose like the entire time slider, certain render settings, like for your range, whatever you're looking for there. Why don't we hit create? Okay. So now for frames, I can drag back and forth and see it, like see every frame of that motion, right? Now, if you're not going to on this one because of the way we're going to render it, but if you were to submit this to the render farm, you need to make sure that those cache files are uploaded with it. So you'll see in my SimBot folder, it created this cache folder. It's these files that tell the render farm how to simulate that flag when it's rendering it. And so if the render farm is rendering number 19, it has to go pull that number 19 cache file to understand how to render the flag, right? So if you forget to upload those, your render would flicker all over the place. However, Samira made an observation here. If you try to render this in Arnold, it crashes your file. I know why that is. I'm going to show you why that is. It's actually something, if I'd have realized this was the issue, I would have fixed it before I gave it to you. If you go to your render settings here, right? I currently have mine set to hardware 2.0 and I see everything. But if you set this to Arnold, you get this, right? And if you try to render with the Arnold render view, it throws an error and Maya crashes. Feel free to test that, but save first. There's a couple of like very roundabout ways of fixing this. The actual answer to how to fix this, I will show you right now though. But if you get to this point after you've cached it out, this may break the cache and you may have to recache it, but it should simulate fine still yet. So I'm going to go ahead and save this just to make sure, increment and save. And I'm just going to do a new file, a new scene. And instead of opening that file, instead of going to File, Open Scene, and opening this, what I'm going to do is import it. That sounds like, that may not make sense, right? So think of import as I made a file on another program and I need to merge it with this file, right? So right now what I have is a completely new scene, and what I'm going to do is merge in all of those files I was just working, or all of those elements from that other Maya file I was just working in. The reason this fixes the issue is because there's something broken in that other file in these like render setting, in this render settings node, right? It gives you the error and tells you the name of the node. Occasionally that gets messed up, and you'll see this often in other classes, so I feel like this is a reason to show you now. That if I just import this in, what it does is it brings in all of the models and all of the textures and all of the encoth settings, but it doesn't bring in those broken nodes. It just uses the nodes that are in this new scene instead, right? And so if I do that and import it, okay, everything I think should work. Hit 6 to get my textures back. There we go. Go in here. And actually all my cache lined up and everything. But now if I go to my render settings, now I should be able to render in Arnold. Now, I haven't actually tried rendering this in Arnold. I kind of made this project to not be too render heavy. So what I was planning on doing with this is instead of having you render it in Arnold, I was just going to have you, like, it looks okay in the viewport for what we're doing today. So I was just going to have you do a viewport 2.0 render. That's the Arnold render view. I don't think it has any major lights in it, so we may be able to just put a sky dome in there. And if you're wanting to render in Arnold, there we go. If you're wanting to render in Arnold, you're going to have to do a little bit of material work because everything's kind of glossy, right? But it should still work out pretty well as well. Ideally, what we would do is just render through hardware 2.0. And that's just so we can get something to turn in. Like this is an exercise, not a project, so I'm not going to be too terribly concerned about it. Hardware 2.0 though is effectively a game engine renderer. So if we were to create some lights in here, do a directional light, where's that at? There it is. Turn on shadows, turn on some ambient occlusion, turn on some motion blur. Oh, actually have a light in there already, right? So we should be able to adjust this and actually get an okay looking render out of here just with hardware 2.0, right? So feel free to, we can mess around with this a little bit later, but turning on lights and shadows are going to get you a little bit more lighting information in there, and we can do motion blur and everything from there. So. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have him crash through some stuff, because that's the other part of the project. I'm not going to do anything too complex. I'm actually just going to stack a bunch of boxes here and have him crash through those. So create my first box. F to find it. There it is. Same place it always makes it. And so I'm going to get out here at about frame 90, I guess, 80, 90. That's where I want him to crash through it, right? So the cool thing about Bullet is that you can have like hundreds of objects, like thousands of objects, and it will simulate physics for all of them. So I'm going to make a bunch of these, right? And sort of the way to do that is leverage math. I'm just going to keep duplicating all of them. Control D, right? Get something like that. The environment's turned off. So yeah, there we go. I want this to be disastrous. So when I have all of these selected, just so we can see them a little better, let's put a material on there. And I'll go ahead and make that material another easy to see color. There we go. I'm digging the pinks and purples today. Although pink and purple on the flag, it may start to blend in. Let's make something where it stands out a little bit more. Like green. How's that? There we go. That's nice. So here's all of my objects, right? Again, we're going to turn all of these into bullet objects to simulate, right? So if I look for bullet, not up here, Windows, settings and preferences, plugin manager, we just need to turn on bullet. So ABC bullet loaded, and then this bullet MLL loaded. There we go. And so here we go. We have bullet now. I can set this as active rigid bodies with all of them selected at the same time. And now when I hit play on this, they're all going to fall to the floor, right? So we need something for them to settle on first. I can use this ground plane, and I think that'll be fine. I just have to figure out which one that is. I have my environment locked in the layers, so I'm just going to unlock that, select that. I may go ahead and add some of these buildings here as well as passive colliders, just so they don't go tumbling off into space, that sort of stuff. There we go. So I'm going to select all those and choose, let's see, bullet, passive rigid bodies. And so now when I hit play, that happens. So that's not necessarily what we wanted, right? So the reason this is happening is because of the collision objects. They have like a little bit of a gap in between them to, like if you throw something at another object really hard, it's like when do you want it to impact it, right? And do you want it to impact right as the mesh hits it, or do you want a little bit of a gap in there, right? So for this, if I go to my attribute editor, actually there's a couple of reasons this may be doing it too. Straight line, no wait, translate, there it is. Rigid body shape, right? We get the collider shape type right here, right? And right now it's showing as box. There's sort of a way we can see this. So instead of box, I'm going to turn this into mesh, which only works with the static objects. Okay, I think I can do that with each of these, and that'll work. Mesh. Yeah. Mesh. So now when I hit play, hopefully it won't do it quite as bad. Huh. That's interesting. What happens if I do hull? Are those starting off through the floor? Maybe not, but maybe a little too close. Oh, don't crash on me. Oof. Let me move these up just a little bit. Let's see if that fixes it. I didn't make that a passive collider, didn't I? There we go. So, what the issue with it was, I did make it a passive collider. Apparently it wasn't fitting correctly to the shape. I set it to static mesh, and then I hit refit, and that allows it to collide with it now. There we go. All right. And grab some of these others and go ahead and refit them as well. Yeah, there it is. Mesh refit. go. So a little bit of a problem where they're all falling over. I think that's just that I have them. Oh goodness. Stacked a little too far apart from each other. And so when they're falling and sort of compressing together, they're getting, it's just a little bit too far of a fall to the ground there, right? So let's try like making that a little less difficult for them. We have to do this on frame 1. And that way they just don't fall as far. And I can do a little bit of that with each row. Okay. So Bullet also has gravity. I think that for me, if I were working on this, not in front of an entire class where you're all waiting on me, more than likely what I would do is I would just very strategically get them a little closer to each other. That way there's a little less bounce when they fall and bounce like that. Some of the other things you can do though is like changing the amount of bounce in each of them. Because each of these have like different dynamic properties as well. So like forces, impulses, and stuff like that. One of the other things I think we can do right now to kind of make this a little easier on ourselves is I'm going to change this gravity, drop it down just a little bit, just so it's not pulling on them quite so hard, and they'll probably stay standing a little longer that way. Okay, at least long enough for us to crash a robot through them, right? Yeah, I don't want any wind. What if I did a little more gravity? Yep, too much. It shouldn't be 0.90. That's going to be way too low. So 0.98 gives us this, but I have a feeling when they fall, they're going to fall kind of slow. So the next thing we're going to need to do is make this object crash through it, right? So we need to make this a passive collider too. Unfortunately, some stuff's going to mess up, I think, when we do that. So we're going to do increment and save again. Oh yeah. 2. So let's go ahead and go to Bullet. I have the robot itself selected, and I'm going to make that a passive rigid body. And I think I'm going to get an error there. So let's see what happens, see if it works. Nope. And so the reason it's not working, I believe, is because it's not passive, right? It's actually moving. Right? This object is moving. So It has keyframes on it, it has deformers on it, and so that's not technically passive anymore. That's actually called a kinematic rigid body. So I want to try body type kinematic rigid body when I create it. Close. Apparently it's still keeping the old one, so let me undo that. Gotta go find that rigid body on this thing. Let me undo that from where I put it on it before. So let's try it again. Bullet, passive rigid body, box, let's try hull instead. And then instead of static body, I'm going to do kinematic rigid body. Let's see if that works. Apply, close, invalid collision shape type. So, okay. Go back a few steps. So that's not the error I was actually expecting to get, but all right. I'm going to show you sort of the trick here. And you actually will get this often with collisions, is that this is a complex shape that we have doing a lot of other complex shape things, right? And so what we'll use is a proxy object to do the collision, right? If I go back to 0, close this down, hit F so I can zoom in on here. I'm just going to create a box that's kind of in the shape of this robot. Right? Pull him over here and sort of put him in here to stand in for the robot, right? You can be even more specific with the shape if you want to. The kinematic thing, we can make that work, but right now I'm going to primarily focus on just getting something to collide through it to look right. So I'll do something like this, right? And I am going to do a parent constraint from my robot's controller here, the thing that we've animated, right, to this box. So I'm going to do regular constraint. So under animation, constrain, parent. Right. And then that box is what I'm going to make my passive collider. So again, effects, we're going to go to bullet, passive rigid body. Let's see what that gives us. What? Why are you not working? Bullet. Let me undo all of that before I constrained it and everything. Modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type, history. So this isn't constrained. I want to make it a passive rigid body. That seemed to work. So let's do it the other way. Click that, click this, that. Okay, so it's working with it now, but I still don't think it's going to collide with these boxes just yet. Which doesn't make sense, because all the other passive rigid bodies did, right? So the reason with this is we have this listed as a static body, and we're going to do it as a kinematic rigid body instead, right? So now I think that this will work. And this is why I don't teach the effects class. Hall. Fit. Your body's gonna fall, right? I think. Oh, something's happening. It'll keep me up at night, so I'm not going to let it sleep either. Let's see if that works.
Why did it work when it's inside of the boxes, but when it comes to the...
Yeah, you're right. Like what I did was like, so wait, I may have to, it may be this refit. Does that need to be on? Kinematic never sleeps. Refit. So if this isn't encouraging you to be a teacher someday, I don't know whatever will. Oh, it's the initial condition, isn't it? So I actually know what's happening. I'm just trying to remember how to fix this. I'm going to try something different here. I think it may have to do with the constraint. So I'm going to delete this box because I hate that box. There we go. now they're working, but only when I'm scrubbing. Let's see if it still does it. Cross your fingers. I did the same exact thing. Like that's what I've been doing for the last 10 minutes is that over and over again. And I did it again and like it worked. Okay. So what did I do?
I'm glad you recorded this so we can see.
So we can go back and see what I did. So the reason I did all that though, like if you set the visibility on this to 0, now it looks like the robot crashes through it. Surprise! Like, so this is what we're going for. Let me go back and try it again, but let me save this one first. So increment and save. I'm going to delete that. I didn't mean to delete the whole box though. Shift H, right? And I'm going to delete the cache on it. So if I did, or the so bullet. Remove bullet from selection. Okay, so now it's just a box, right? What I did is I selected it. Well, let me try this first. I selected the control, selected the box, and then I made sure that there was a constraint on there. So constraint parent. So now the box is going with it, right? Now if I select that box and go back to effects and did bullet, create passive rigid body, go to my options here, and make sure this is set to kinematic rigid body, hit apply and close, and for some reason that seems to mess it up. So what I did again was I deleted that parent constraint and recreated that parent constraint that I had made to begin with. Oh, sorry. Constraint parent, and I believe now if it doesn't work, like I'm just gonna rage quit this whole machine. Like just flip it. There we go. So I'll be honest, I think I understand. I think it's because I'm not keyframing it here. I'm constraining it. And so for you to create a kinematic object on it, it has to already have keyframes on it. But I didn't have keyframes on it. So when I did that, it kind of messed up my constraint, so I just had to reconstrain it. I think that there's a cleaner way of doing that. So I will do a little research on that here in the next one. That's one of the reasons I wanted to walk through it today, is because I knew that there was a lot of little things that would catch us as little hiccups. So at this point now, I can just hide that box, and we're going to get hopefully a simulation that makes sense. Just Control H will hide it, or you can turn off the visibility. So if I go back here on this step, so it's just this visibility right here. If you just set that to 0, it will turn it off. So, and so now it's what's colliding with these objects, not the robot. Now, having said that, I think we can make the robot do it too in the same method. I didn't make this rig, so I don't know if that's skinned. And I think what was really happening is even the other times it was working. It was just thinking of the box's collision object as way back there behind it and not moving. So it was never crashing through the boxes, right? There's a button in here somewhere I could go digging for that turns on the visibility of your collision box, but I can't remember where that's at in Bullet right now. Hopefully it's clear that effects is not necessarily what I do every day, right? However, I do feel like it's important to have it as an introduction in here in case this is something you like. This fighting with it like this though, like Marty Fitzgerald has a phrase, he's like, every concentration, every focus has a tedious part of it, right? Just what flavor of tedium do you like, right? Do you like editing curves, or do you like fighting with collision objects or fighting with the physics of it, right? If any of it was easy, we wouldn't be getting paid to do it. So you're kind of saying that this is the parts that that you would be fighting with, is little technical things break and you have to reconnect those up. Now, the thing you'll notice is there's a lot of things simulating in this scene now, and so it's moving much slower, right? If we want to see the actual speed that this is moving, we'd have to play blast it or render it, right? However, I want to just sort of not simulate anymore. Like, I'm happy with this simulation, so I just want this to be permanent, right? And to do that with all these boxes, what I have to do is bake out that information. Okay, so let's say this is the version I'm happy with, right? This is not a piece of fabric where the mesh is changing every frame, right? All we're really changing is the translates and rotates. It's just a really complex series of translates and rotates. So I can make this permanent just as a set of keyframes. The way we do that is select all of our cubes that are in here. And under modify, they moved it. Edit, keys, bake simulation, and go to my options box. What this is going to do is it's going to look at every frame of the animation, say, where is that box, and then it's going to set a keyframe for it, right? So we're going to end up with just a whole bunch of keyframes on those boxes instead of a simulation that messes up, right? I can sample it by, like right now it's sampling every frame. Like this is a thing you can use to get like a rough kind of animation that you can edit later. And so I'm going to go ahead and let it sample every frame, but you could choose to have it sample at every 2 frames or 10 frames or whatever. But the amount of detail that's in this motion, I think I need every frame. So there's also this smart bake, which means if something's not moving for a long period of time, it just won't set keyframes on it. It'll minimize the amount of keyframes. We can try that to see if that works or not, but I'm not really terribly worried about the size of this right now. So all my objects are set, hit bake, and what it's going to do is go through and look at every frame, simulate it, and set a keyframe. So when it's done, my timeline is just going to be like solid red, right? It's going to be a keyframe on every frame of this animation for every one of those boxes. Which sounds like a lot for us to process, but it's way less for Maya to process. It's already all the information saved. It just has to read it, right? And so the other thing about this is, even though it's setting a keyframe on all of these, now I'm giving Maya conflicting information. I'm telling Maya that I want these objects to be simulated, and I want them to be controlled by a keyframe. So if you look at your channel box, areas are green and areas are red, right? Green means it's not being controlled by the keyframe, even though those keyframes are there. So if I want the keyframes to be what's controlling it, that means I have to remove the bullet simulation now, right? So if I scrub through here, you're going to see it's still like trying to simulate, right? Even though I have a keyframe on everything. So the way we do that is just go back up to the bullet menu, under effects, bullet, and then I'm just going to say remove bullet from selection because I have all of them selected. You could also at this point, if you wanted to, just say delete entire bullet system. And so now bullet's not even a thing in our scene anymore, and all of this is just a series of keyframes. Okay. So from here, you just have to make some cameras, right? I'll go ahead and make a fun one to follow here. I'm going to create a camera. We'll call this follow cam. Right. Panel perspective. Go to my follow cam. I'm going to find my robot. There he is. It's going to be something like this. Figure out what my render is going to look like. So maybe something like this, right? And then that control that is animating this again, this here, I'm going to select it. What I may do is go ahead and group my follow cam first. So Control G. So now this camera is inside of a group. So So let's do that again. Select my controller, select my cam group, and animation, constraint, parent. And what we should get now this animation where you can see the collisions happen. Now the reason I put it in a group is because if I really wanted to, I could still edit this camera and get it from a slightly different angle, maybe even something like this. We just watch it again and see what we get. So again though, if I want to see this in real time, I'm going to go ahead and play blast it. QuickTime, H.264, all the way up, save file, play blast. And now, this way we will not be getting it in this like jumpy image we're seeing now. We should be able to get something that plays back in the real frame rate. Okay, they're falling a little slow, but that's because I had to turn the gravity down because I didn't want to keep fighting with making them stay standing. Okay, that was rough. Let's go ahead and save this again. I'm feeling this video is something you can laugh at for years to come, as I'm just like sitting there scratching my head trying to figure this thing out. Hopefully, you're going to have a lot of skipping through on this one, skipping over those long stretches where I'm fighting with it. The funny thing is, for you, it may actually work the first time. It may like just click a few buttons and it works. Any questions on this? Lots of questions. Yes.
I can't actually get my boxes to even drop on each other.
Okay, we'll work on that. Yes.
The layer used on my slide is all broken up along the subdivisions. Like there's spaces. I don't know what it
Did you select all of the object when you were constrained? Yeah. Is it simulating it all? That is weird. Try to check it out. hold this again. So, any major questions, like the out loud questions, like, or is it more of a kind of check with me at your desk?
And I've got everything set to the active Rigidbody, but I can't get them to some of the floor. So I can get them to the ground plate, but the ground plate is below the problem.
So a common question you may all be, or a common issue you may all be having is getting the passive colliders to collide correctly. So for example, like this floor plane here, like where I was having trouble getting it to land on the floor, what you need to do is under your attribute editor, it's kind of hard because you have to dig through here until you find it. There's a, right there, the bullet rigid body shape. So it's going to be under the collider shape type. Make sure that's set to either mesh or hull. And if you set it to mesh and it still has problems, try hitting this refit button and see if that fixes it. So basically what this is saying is, like, if it's set to box, how it's going to show you that is, or how it's going to collide with it is it's going to build a box around this shape, and sometimes that blows through the object. So if you set it to mesh and then set it to refit, that usually solves it. So see if that helps. Okay. And yeah, just a play blast of this will be fine. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kill this video and